The mud-flecked dropship hovered 30 feet above the viscous surface of Valtros Prime, its landing thrusters struggling against the planet's unpredictable magnetic fields. Inside the cramped deployment bay, Private Aiden Cross adjusted his environment suit for the 5th time, painfully aware that he was the only human among the 12-member Coalition Special Operations Team. Final atmospheric readings confirm toxic concentrations of methane and sulfur compounds, announced Lieutenant Velra, the willowy Altari scout, whose translucent skin glowed faintly in the dim red emergency lighting. All personnel will maintain suit integrity at all times. General Thraxus, the mission commander, rose to his full 9-foot height, his segmented Hurlation exoskeleton clicking as armored plates shifted into combat readiness. The general's compound eyes swept over the assembled team, pausing fractionally longer on Aiden. Coalition intelligence reports the command frigate Indomitable crashed 17 kilometers northeast of our landing zone. Thraxus's voice rasped through the translator. Its black box contains critical strategic data that cannot fall into Krivian hands. We have 6 hours to retrieve it before enemy scouts arrive. Aiden felt the familiar weight of scrutiny from his alien teammates. As the newest member of the elite unit, and the first human ever assigned to the legendary Vortex Squad, he understood their skepticism. Humans were latecomers to the Coalition, viewed as primitive upstarts whose homeworld had barely achieved interstellar travel when the 5 established species had already been mapping the cosmos for centuries. Cross. General Thraxus's mandibles clicked with barely concealed disdain. You will maintain the equipment. Touch nothing you don't understand. Several of the aliens made the short, sharp exhalations that passed for laughter in their respective biologies. Aiden kept his expression neutral. He had graduated top of his class at the academy, but here, surrounded by warriors from technologically advanced civilizations, his achievements meant little. The dropship bucked suddenly, tossing everyone against their restraints. Atmospheric interference intensifying, the pilot's disembodied voice announced. Cannot maintain stable hover. Deploying now. The bay doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a world swathed in greenish mist. The fetid stench of rotting vegetation penetrated even the advanced filtration systems of their suits. Below stretched an endless expanse of swamp, bubbling pools of unknown liquid punctuated by twisted, skeletal vegetation. Hover packs active, ordered Thraxus. Standard formation. Maintain distance from unidentified liquids. One by one, the squad activated their personal propulsion units. Gentle blue light pulsed as anti-gravity technology defied the planet's natural forces. Aiden checked his own pack, feeling the reassuring vibration as it powered up. The only solid ground visible was a small rocky outcropping where the dropship hovered, their designated extraction point. And somewhere beyond the mist lay similar terrain where the command frigate had crashed. Between these points of safety stretched 17 kilometers of treacherous, unexplored swampland. Aiden took his position at the rear of the formation as they descended from the ship. The moment his boots touched the landing pad, he felt the difference between simulator training and actual field conditions. The gravity of Valtros Prime was slightly stronger than Earth standard, making every movement require extra effort. The squad activated their hover packs and rose 10 feet above the sucking morass of the swamp. Forward, commanded Thraxus, and the formation began moving northeast. For the first hour, they made steady progress. The swamp beneath them bubbled occasionally, releasing noxious gases that their sensors identified as primarily methane, with traces of hydrogen sulfide. Strange, eyeless creatures briefly surfaced in the murky pools before submerging again. The vegetation grew denser as they proceeded, twisted trees rising from the muck, their bark metallic and sharp-edged. Lieutenant Velra led the way, her species' natural affinity for navigation making her the obvious choice as scout. Behind her flew General Thraxus, flanked by his personal guards, hulking Drovian twins whose layered muscle tissue could stop projectiles that would tear through standard armor. Sprock, the Yadari engineer, flew slightly ahead of Aiden, his six-fingered hands constantly manipulating a holographic display projected from his wrist unit. The small, gray-skinned alien had barely acknowledged Aiden's existence since his assignment to the squad 3 weeks ago. Detecting unusual magnetic fluctuations, Sprock announced suddenly. Recommend increasing altitude. Before Thraxus could respond, a blinding flash erupted from the swamp below, followed by a thunderous crack that seemed to split the very air. A wave of energy surged upward, engulfing the squad in crackling blue lightning. Aiden's hoverpack sputtered and died. For a moment, he hung suspended in disbelief. Then gravity reclaimed him, and he plummeted toward the swamp. He hit the surface of a viscous pool with a sickening splash, immediately sinking waist-deep in thick, cold mud. His suit's external sensors flashed red warnings. The liquid was highly acidic, already beginning to corrode his outer protective layer. Around him, the rest of the squad was similarly falling, their technology rendered useless by what appeared to be a naturally occurring electromagnetic pulse. Their shouts of alarm filled the comm channel as they scrambled to find purchase on anything solid. "Status report!" Thraxus bellowed, somehow having landed on a partially submerged log that temporarily kept him above the worst of the muck. "All hoverpacks non-functional," Sprock replied, his normally calm voice tinged with panic as he clung to a twisted tree root. "Communications to base offline. Scanner arrays disabled. We've experienced a complete systems failure." Aiden struggled to pull himself toward a more solid-looking tussock of vegetation. His suit's integrity indicator showed 92% and falling. He had perhaps an hour before the swamp's corrosive elements would breach his life support. "Can we repair the hoverpacks?" asked Velra, who had managed to climb onto a small island of relatively solid ground. "Negative," Sprock responded after a quick assessment. "The magnetic surge has permanently damaged the quantum circuitry. They are beyond field repair." A heavy silence fell over the comm channel as the implications became clear. They were stranded 17 kilometers from their extraction point, surrounded by lethal terrain, with no way to call for help. "We adapt," General Thraxus finally declared. "We are Coalition Special Forces. We complete the mission regardless of circumstances." Over the next hour, the team managed to gather on the largest patch of semi-solid ground they could find, a muddy island, perhaps 20 meters across. Their situation looked increasingly dire. Without functioning hoverpacks, they would have to traverse the swamp on foot. But the consistency of the terrain made that virtually impossible. Any step off their temporary haven risked sinking into quicksand like mud or acidic pools. The alien officers debated options, while Aiden surveyed their surroundings more carefully. His engineering training pushed him to see problems differently, not as technological failures, but as puzzles with physical solutions. Near the edge of their small island, he noticed several fallen trees half submerged in the swamp. Unlike earth trees, these had a metallic quality to their structure, but what caught his attention was their buoyancy. Despite their apparent density, they floated atop the viscous liquid. Moving closer to investigate, Aiden knelt at the island's edge. He reached for a nearby branch and pulled it toward him. The material was surprisingly light, yet incredibly strong. When he pushed it down into the muck, it rebounded to the surface as soon as he released pressure. "What are you doing, human?" General Thraxus's voice cut through Aiden's concentration. "Sir, I believe these tree analogs have properties we could utilize," Aiden replied, standing to face the imposing hurlation. "They're buoyant in this environment and appear resistant to the swamp's corrosive nature." "Explain your point quickly," Thraxus demanded. "We could build a bridge, sir," Aiden said. "A floating pathway using these logs lashed together. It could support our weight and allow us to traverse the swamp without sinking." The silence that followed was broken by Sprock's high-pitched laughter. "Primitive technology? You suggest we trust our lives to sticks and swamp debris?" Several other squad members joined in the derision, their translator units unable to fully convey the nuances of their mockery. But the sentiment was clear enough. General Thraxus raised a clawed hand for silence. "We are coalition officers with advanced training. We will find a proper solution." Aiden stepped back, knowing better than to press the issue. Instead, he continued his examination of the materials available to them. Besides the logs, he discovered vine-like growths with remarkable tensile strength. When twisted together, they formed cords capable of supporting considerable weight. While the alien officers continued their increasingly desperate attempts to repair their technology, Aiden quietly began gathering materials. He dragged several logs to a relatively flat section of their island and began stripping the razor-sharp branches. Lieutenant Velra eventually noticed his activity. The Altari scout approached silently, observing his work with obvious curiosity. "Your primitive solution will not work," she stated flatly, though her tone lacked the derision of the others. "It might," Aiden replied without pausing in his work. "These logs are naturally buoyant in this environment. If properly secured together, they could distribute our weight across a larger surface area, preventing us from sinking." "The distance is too great," Velra countered. "We would need hundreds of these logs." "We don't need to bridge the entire 17 kilometers at once," Aiden explained. "We build sections, use them to reach the next island or stand of trees, gather more materials, and continue. It's slow, but it's movement." Velra's luminescent eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You've done this before?" "Not exactly this," Aiden admitted. "But on Earth, we have similar challenging terrains. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective." The Altari watched him work for several more minutes. "I will inform General Thraxus of your progress," she finally said, though Aiden couldn't tell if this was meant as support or a threat to stop his unauthorized activity. By the time Thraxus stormed over, flanked by Sprock and the Drovian guards, Aiden had completed a small prototype raft, 4 logs lashed together with twisted vines in a square pattern, with cross-bracing for stability. "You waste valuable resources on this primitive contraption." Thraxus loomed over Aiden, his armored exoskeleton amplifying his already intimidating presence. "Sir, with respect, our options are limited." Aiden stood his ground. "Sprock has confirmed our technology is beyond repair. We have approximately 4 hours before the Krivian scouts arrive. This may be our only viable method of traversing the swamp." "You expect coalition officers to crawl across floating sticks?" Sprock interjected, his translator failing to mask his contempt. "I expect us to complete the mission by any means necessary, sir," Aiden replied, meeting the general's compound gaze directly. "Isn't that the first principle of coalition special forces?" A tense silence followed. Around them, the swamp bubbled and hissed, occasional flashes of bioluminescence punctuating the greenish haze. Time was slipping away. "Demonstrate," Thraxus finally ordered. Aiden nodded and pushed his small raft to the edge of their island. With methodical movements, he extended it out over the swamp and carefully stepped onto the platform. It sank slightly under his weight, but stabilized a few inches below the surface, crucially, keeping him above the most corrosive layers of the swamp. "It works for a human," Sprock observed dismissively. "Our species have different mass distributions and requirements. Then we adjust the design accordingly," Aiden replied. "With more logs and stronger binding techniques, we can support even the heaviest among us." He looked pointedly at the Drovian guards, whose massive frames would indeed require substantial reinforcement. For several heartbeats, General Thraxus seemed to be calculating options in his mind. Then, with evident reluctance, he made his decision. "Lieutenant Velra, assist Cross in gathering materials. Sprock, analyze the structural properties of these vegetation samples and determine optimal configuration for maximum load-bearing capacity. The rest of you, prepare essential equipment for transport. We proceed with this bridge." The next 2 hours passed in intense activity. With the general's authorization, the entire squad mobilized to collect logs and vines. Aiden directed the construction effort, demonstrating proper lashing techniques and load distribution principles. To his surprise, the aliens proved quick studies. Velra's agility made her exceptionally adept at retrieving materials from precarious positions. Sprock, once engaged with the problem, applied his analytical mind to calculating the optimal thickness and arrangement of logs for different body types. Even the Drovian guards, with their immense strength, became valuable assets in moving the heavier sections into position. As they worked, Aiden explained the principles behind the construction. On Earth, indigenous peoples developed similar techniques thousands of years ago. Some bridges built this way spanned hundreds of meters and lasted for generations. "Your species relied on such methods into your technological age?" asked Velra, her tone genuinely curious rather than mocking. "Not relied on, but remembered," Aiden clarified. "Earth has wildly diverse environments. We learned that sometimes the old ways work best in certain situations." "Inefficient," Sprock commented, though with less derision than before. "But adaptable." By the 3-hour mark, they had constructed a floating bridge extending nearly 50 meters from their island. The design had evolved through rapid iteration. What began as simple rafts lashed together had become a more sophisticated structure with a slightly raised center path for stability and guide ropes along the sides. "We must test it properly before committing the entire squad," General Thraxus declared, examining the completed section with professional scrutiny. "I'll go first," Aiden volunteered immediately. "No," Thraxus countered. "This is your design. You will remain to address any structural failures. Lieutenant Velra has the lightest frame among us. She will make the initial crossing." Velra stepped forward without hesitation. The slender Altari moved with characteristic grace onto the floating pathway. The logs shifted slightly beneath her weight but held firm. With deliberate steps, she proceeded along the bridge, occasionally pausing to test the stability of different sections. The squad watched in tense silence as she reached the end of their construction. Now, standing at the edge of a small cluster of the metallic trees growing directly from the swamp. "Structure is sound," she reported through the comm. "Minor flexibility at connection points, but within acceptable parameters." She turned and made her way back, moving with increasing confidence as she grew accustomed to the bridge's subtle movements. Next, one of the Drovian guards tested the bridge. His massive form caused the structure to sink several inches deeper, but the additional support logs Aiden had insisted on adding held. When he too returned safely, a palpable shift in the squad's attitude occurred. What had begun as skepticism was transforming into cautious hope. "We continue construction," Thraxus ordered. "Cross, direct the placement of the next section." With the proof of concept established, the team worked with renewed vigor. Velra scouted ahead, identifying the most stable points to aim for. From the cluster of trees, they harvested more materials and extended their bridge another 30 meters. As they progressed, they developed a system. Scouts moved ahead along completed sections to gather materials and identify the next landing point. Engineers designed adaptations for different terrain challenges. Construction teams built and secured new segments. It was slow but steady progress through the otherwise impassable swamp. 4 hours into their ordeal, they had covered nearly a kilometer. The distant outline of the crashed frigate had become visible through gaps in the mist, still far away, but no longer seeming impossible to reach. "Krivian scouts will have reached the crash site by now," Thraxus noted grimly. "We must accelerate." "Sir, I have an idea for that," Aiden said. "The bridge supports our weight individually, but we've been moving in sequence. If we space ourselves properly along the entire length, we could all advance simultaneously, dramatically increasing our speed." The general considered this. "The risk of catastrophic failure increases." "Yes, sir, but we've confirmed the structural integrity through multiple stress tests now. The design is sound. After a moment's consideration, Thraxus nodded. Implement your strategy. Cross. They reorganized their approach. Instead of waiting for each section to be fully tested before the entire squad crossed, they now worked in a continuous chain. Those at the front constructed new segments, while those behind maintained and reinforced the existing structure. It was a fluid, organic process that reminded Aiden of ancient human barn raisings he'd read about in historical texts. Another 3 hours passed. The squad had covered nearly 5 kilometers, and the crashed frigate loomed larger ahead of them. But fatigue was setting in. Even with their advanced physiologies, the aliens were showing signs of exhaustion. The constant vigilance required to navigate the unstable bridge, combined with the toxic atmosphere straining their life support systems, was taking its toll. During a brief rest period, Aiden found himself standing beside General Thraxus at the forward edge of their latest segment. The Hurlation commander stood motionless, his compound eyes fixed on the distant objective. Your solution has proven adequate, Thraxus said finally. The translator, struggling to convey the complex harmonics of his native speech. Aiden recognized this as the closest thing to praise he was likely to receive. Thank you, sir. Humans have a reputation in the Coalition, the general continued. Unpredictable, chaotic, prone to emotional rather than logical decisions. He turned his armored head slightly toward Aiden. It is said your kind relies on instinct when technology fails. Sometimes that's necessary, sir. Perhaps. Thraxus shifted his weight, causing the logs beneath them to creak slightly. The Coalition was formed because each species brings unique attributes to our collective defense. The Hurlation tactical mind, Altari sensory perception, Yadari technical expertise, Drovian strength. And humans? Aiden asked when the general paused. That remains to be seen. Thraxus gestured toward their makeshift bridge, stretching behind them across the swamp. But this suggests possibilities. Before Aiden could respond, Lieutenant Velra's urgent voice came through the comm. Movement at the crash site. Confirmed Krivian signatures. At least 3 scout vessels. We are out of time, Thraxus declared. Prepare for combat approach. The final push toward the frigate became a race against time. The squad abandoned some of their safety protocols in favor of speed, stretching materials thinner and taking greater risks with each segment of the bridge. Twice, sections partially collapsed, plunging team members waist-deep into the corrosive swamp before they could be pulled to safety. 8 kilometers in, with the frigate tantalizingly close, they encountered their greatest obstacle yet, a vast stretch of open swamp with no intervening islands or tree stands to use as anchor points. The distance was nearly 200 meters, far beyond what they had attempted so far. We cannot bridge this, Sprock stated flatly, his scanner showing the depths of the acidic pool before them. The structural requirements exceed our available materials. A heavy silence fell over the squad, so close to their objective, yet still out of reach. Aiden studied the challenge before them. Sir, I believe we can modify our approach. Instead of a fixed bridge, we construct a series of rafts, larger, more stable platforms that we can pole across this section like boats. The currents are unpredictable, Velra warned, pointing to swirling patterns visible in the viscous surface. We account for drift by angling our approach, Aiden countered, and we'll need to reinforce the rafts significantly, triple layer the logs, and create outriggers for stability. General Thraxus considered the proposal for only moments before making his decision. Begin construction. We have no alternative. The next hour was perhaps their most intense yet. Every available log and vine was repurposed for the new design. Aiden demonstrated how to create punt poles from the straightest branches, wrapping their ends with woven vine mats to increase surface area for pushing against the thick liquid. They constructed 3 large rafts, each capable of carrying 4 team members. With agonizing care, they launched the first raft, manned by Velra and 3 others skilled in navigation. Using the long poles, they pushed off from the end of their bridge and began the precarious journey across the open swamp. The currents immediately caught the raft, pushing it sideways. The team struggled to correct their course, poles sinking deep into the muck below as they fought for control. For several harrowing minutes, it seemed they might be swept away entirely. Then, gradually, they established a rhythm, compensating for the drift by pushing harder on the downstream side. Slowly, painfully, the first raft made its way across. When they finally reached the far side, a small outcropping of rocky ground, a collective breath seemed to release through the entire squad. The second raft, carrying Sprock and the technical team, made the crossing with the benefit of the first group's experience. They adjusted their technique based on observed current patterns and managed a somewhat smoother journey. Finally, only Aiden, General Thraxus, and the two Drovian guards remained on the near shore with the last raft. This one was the most heavily reinforced, designed to support the exceptional weight of the Drovians' armored bodies. "You first, cross," Thraxus ordered. "Your coordination will be required if structural failure occurs mid-crossing." Aiden stepped onto the raft, feeling it sink deeper than the previous versions, but still maintaining positive buoyancy. The general followed, his armored exoskeleton gleaming with condensation from the swamp's humid atmosphere. Finally, the Drovian guards boarded, positioning themselves at opposite corners to balance the weight distribution. This final crossing proved the most difficult. The combined mass pushed the raft dangerously low in the swamp, with acidic liquid occasionally splashing over the edges. The poles barely reached the bottom in some places, forcing them to paddle awkwardly with improvised oars. Halfway across, a loud crack reverberated through the structure. One of the support logs had split under the tremendous pressure. The raft listed sharply to one side, nearly tipping the Drovian guard into the swamp. "Redistribute!" Aiden shouted. "Move to the opposite corner!" The team shifted positions, temporarily stabilizing the failing raft. But more ominous creaks followed as additional logs began to give way under the strain. "We will not make it," Thraxus stated with characteristic Herlatian directness. "The structural integrity is compromised beyond recovery." Aiden refused to accept defeat. "Sir, with respect, we need to lighten the load." He pointed to the general's back-mounted equipment pack. "Non-essential gear must be jettisoned." For a moment, Thraxus's compound eyes fixed on Aiden with unreadable alien emotion. Then, with a sharp gesture to his guards, the general began removing sections of his ceremonial armor, pieces that marked his rank and achievements, irreplaceable symbols of his status within the coalition. The Drovians followed suit, discarding auxiliary weapons and equipment. Aiden stripped his own pack down to absolute essentials. With each item sacrificed to the swamp, the raft rose slightly higher in the liquid, reducing the pressure on the failing logs. Through sheer determination and constant adjustment, they inched their way across the remaining expanse. When they finally reached the far shore, joining the rest of the waiting squad, the raft literally fell apart beneath them, dissolving back into the swamp as they stepped onto solid ground. "Well engineered, Cross," General Thraxus said simply. "It held exactly as long as required." The crash site of the Indomitable now lay less than a kilometer away. But between them stretched a different kind of challenge. Open, rocky terrain, offering no cover from the Krivian scouts they could now see clearly circling the wreckage. "We've come too far to fail now," Thraxus declared. "Tactical approach. Utilize natural features for concealment." Moving with the disciplined silence of elite forces, the squad advanced toward their objective. They used shallow depressions in the ground, stood of twisted vegetation, and the lingering mist from the swamp to mask their approach. The Krivian scouts, insectoid creatures with advanced cybernetic enhancements, were methodically stripping the crashed frigate of useful technology. Their focus on salvage operations gave the squad a crucial advantage. When they were within 200 meters of the crash site, General Thraxus gathered them for final instructions. Our primary objective remains the retrieval of the black box. Secondary objective: neutralize Krivian scouts to prevent reporting our presence. Lieutenant Velra will lead the infiltration team. Sprock will locate and extract the data core. Cross. Aiden expected to be assigned a peripheral role, perhaps guarding their escape route. Cross will accompany the primary team. Thraxus continued, surprising everyone. His adaptive thinking may prove useful if conventional approaches fail. The squad split into strike teams, using the limited cover available. They closed in on the crash site from multiple angles. When they were within 50 meters, one of the Krivian scouts detected their approach, emitting a high-pitched alarm call to its companions. "Engage!" Thraxus commanded. What followed was a brief but intense firefight. Though their advanced energy weapons had been disabled by the electromagnetic surge, the squad carried backup projectile weapons that remained functional. The Krivians, similarly affected by the planet's magnetic anomalies, fought with mechanical claws and cutting tools. Aiden found himself pinned down behind a twisted metal panel that had once been part of the frigate's hull. A Krivian scout advanced on his position, multiple sensor arrays swiveling to track his movements. With his ammunition depleted, Aiden assessed his surroundings for alternatives. The crashed ship had leaked coolant fluid that pooled nearby, the same highly reactive compound used in coalition engines. Grabbing a sharp fragment of metal, Aiden punctured his light stick, exposing its chemical contents. As the Krivian lunged forward, he threw both items into the coolant pool. The resulting chemical reaction wasn't quite an explosion, but the violent flash and caustic smoke disoriented the scout long enough for Aiden to tackle it, using a technique taught in Earth's ancient martial arts to leverage its own momentum against it. The Krivian crashed into a jagged section of wreckage, its central processing unit impaled on the metal shard. Around him, the rest of the squad was similarly prevailing through a combination of training and improvisation. Within minutes, all Krivian threats had been neutralized. "Sprock, status of the black box?" Thraxus demanded, as they regrouped inside the shattered remnants of the command deck. The Yadari engineer emerged from a tangle of wiring and components, holding a small, nondescript cube. "Data core intact, quantum encryption seal unbroken." "Excellent." The general turned to address the full squad. "Our mission is half complete. We still face the challenge of returning to the extraction point." "Sir," Aiden said, "during the engagement, I observed Krivian scout vessels at the perimeter. They appear functional despite the magnetic anomalies. Their technology is designed differently than ours." Sprock confirmed, after a quick analysis. "Partially organic components with natural electromagnetic shielding." "Can we appropriate one?" Thraxus asked. "Affirmative," Sprock replied. "But their neural interface is incompatible with our physiologies. We would need to manually override their control systems." All eyes turned to Aiden, the squad's resident expert in primitive mechanical solutions. "I believe I can bypass the biological components and establish direct control of the propulsion system," he said, after examining the nearest scout vessel. "It won't be elegant, but it should get us back to the extraction point." "Proceed," Thraxus ordered. Working with Sprock, Aiden dismantled the neural interface of the Krivian vessel and reconstructed a mechanical control system using components salvaged from their damaged equipment and the crashed frigate. It was a hybridized monstrosity that would have horrified coalition engineers. But after 2 hours of intensive work, the repurposed vessel hummed to life. "It can carry 4 at most," Aiden reported. "We'll need to make multiple trips." "Unacceptable," Thraxus countered. "The longer we remain, the greater the risk of additional Krivian forces arriving. We will salvage all 3 scout vessels." Under Aiden's direction, the squad quickly adapted the remaining Krivian craft. As they worked, the planet's strange day-night cycle began to shift, the greenish mist taking on a deeper, more ominous hue. "We must depart immediately," Velra warned, her species' heightened sensitivity to atmospheric changes detecting an approaching storm. The magnetic fluctuations are intensifying. In groups of 4, the squad boarded the repurposed vessels. The controls were crude, literally strings and salvaged metal rods connected to critical systems, but functional. They rose shakily into the air, the organic technology of the Krivian craft seemingly immune to the magnetic anomalies that had doomed their own equipment. The journey back to the extraction point took less than 30 minutes by air, a stark contrast to the grueling 9-hour ordeal of their outbound journey. As they approached the landing pad where their ordeal had begun, they could see the Coalition dropship waiting, its pilot evidently having remained despite the communication blackout. After landing and securing the black box, General Thraxus gathered the squad for a final address before boarding. Coalition Special Forces complete their missions regardless of circumstances, he began, his translator conveying the formal cadence of a ceremonial declaration. Today, we faced unprecedented challenges. Our technology failed. Our training was tested. Our unity was proven. The general's compound eyes swept over the assembled team before settling on Aiden. Private Cross, step forward. Aiden advanced, standing at attention despite his exhaustion. The coalition was formed on the principle that diverse perspectives strengthen our collective capability. Thraxus continued. Today, that principle was validated. Your unconventional methods achieved what our standard protocols could not. From a compartment in his remaining armor, the general removed a small insignia, a stylized representation of the coalition emblem, modified with the distinctive mark of Vortex Squad. You have earned your place among us, Thraxus stated, affixing the insignia to Aiden's battered environment suit. Not as a human among aliens, but as a soldier of the coalition. The rest of the squad signaled their agreement in their various biological ways. Altari luminescence, Yadari resonance hums, Drovian percussive chest beats, and the complex mandible clicks of the general's own Hurlation acknowledgement. As they boarded the dropship, Aiden glanced back at the swamp that had nearly claimed their lives. In the distance, just visible through the mist, he could make out sections of their improvised bridge still floating on the surface, a temporary mark of ingenuity soon to be reclaimed by the hostile environment. Lieutenant Velra moved to stand beside him at the viewport as the dropship lifted off. Your bridge is dissolving, she observed, her translator conveying a tone that might have been wistfulness. Nothing remains of your solution. That's all right, Aiden replied. It served its purpose. Perhaps, Velra said, her luminescent eyes reflecting the receding landscape. There is something to be learned from impermanent solutions. The Altari believe that adaptability often supersedes perfection. On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. The dropship accelerated upward, breaking through the toxic atmosphere toward the coalition cruiser waiting in orbit. Below them, the last visible section of their bridge disappeared into the swamp, leaving no trace of their passage across the hostile world. But something intangible remained, a new respect among the squad, a recognition that technological sophistication and primitive ingenuity were not opposing forces, but complementary strengths. In the elite Vortex Squad, Private Aiden Cross had proven that humanity's place in the coalition was not merely political expediency, but a genuine strategic advantage. As the cruiser's hangar bay enveloped the returning dropship, General Thraxus approached Aiden one final time. Our next deployment is to the ice moons of Solaros, the general informed him. The environment is said to be impossible to navigate without specialized equipment. Sounds challenging, sir, Aiden replied. Indeed. Thraxus's mandibles clicked in what Aiden was beginning to recognize as the Hurlation equivalent of anticipation. I look forward to seeing what primitive solution you devise. The hangar doors sealed behind them, and the coalition cruiser engaged its faster-than-light drive, leaving Valtros Prime and its deadly swamps behind. The mission was complete, the objective secured, but the greater victory was the bridge built not of logs and vines, but of trust and mutual respect across the vast differences of species and cultures. A bridge that, unlike its physical counterpart, would endure long after the swamp had reclaimed its materials.